The rain-slicked streets of New Harbor pulsed faintly under the glow of distant street lamps. It was the kind of night that seemed to hum with something unseen, a quiet vibration beneath the city's surface. The mist clung low to the ground, blurring edges, softening the world into shapes that seemed to shift when you weren't looking. Derek Morrow didn't believe in hauntings. He didn't believe in curses, ghosts, or the whispers about certain parts of town where the air grew colder and the shadows seemed to stare back. That night, however, he would learn the city didn't care what he believed. It started with music. He'd been walking home after a late shift at the docks, collar turned up against the drizzle, when a strange rhythm drifted through the rain. It wasn't loud, just a soft, steady beat, layered with a slow, haunting melody. It didn't match any music he'd heard before. It seemed to pulse with the rain itself, weaving into the sound of each droplet hitting the pavement. The alley it came from was narrow and unfamiliar, half hidden between two shuttered pawn shops. At its end glowed a faint purple light. The sign was small, written in looping silver script, Midnight Veil. It swung gently as though there were a breeze inside. Derek almost walked away. But the music pressed into him, subtle, yet irresistible. It seemed to whisper that one drink, one look inside, wouldn't hurt. The entrance was a tall black door with no handle. It opened soundlessly as he approached. Inside was warmth. Dim lighting painted the walls in deep violet and crimson hues. The scent was strange, sweet perfume mixed with something metallic, faint but sharp enough to taste in the back of his throat. The place was crowded, but not in the chaotic way of most nightclubs. People swayed slowly to the music, moving as if underwater. No one laughed. No one shouted over the noise. They just moved, eyes half closed, lips parted like they were breathing in something intoxicating. A hostess in a shimmering black gown appeared from the shadows. Her smile was beautiful, but too still, like it had been painted on. "First time here?" she asked, voice low and velvet smooth. "Yeah," Derek said. His words felt heavier than they should. She nodded, gesturing toward the bar. "We like to keep our newcomers close." The bartender was pale, his skin almost translucent under the violet light. Without asking, he slid a glass toward Derek, liquid black as ink, with faint threads of silver swirling through it. "What is this?" Derek asked. The bartender's eyes caught the light in a strange way. "It's what everyone drinks here." Against his better judgment, Derek sipped. It was warm, richer than anything he'd tasted, and it spread through him instantly. His muscles relaxed, but his senses sharpened. The music seemed louder now, the bass a slow heartbeat that synced with his own. Then he saw her. On the far side of the dance floor, a woman stood still in a pool of shadow. Her dress was blood red, clinging to her like liquid. Her hair, black as the night outside, spilled over her shoulders. Even from across the room, Derek could feel her watching him. The crowd parted when she began to move. No one looked at her. No one seemed to notice. She glided toward him, her feet barely touching the floor. Her eyes were an unnatural shade of silver. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered when she reached him. Her voice cut through the music like a blade. Before Derek could speak, she took his hand. The instant her skin touched his, the world shifted. The music slowed to a deep, dragging throb. The violet and crimson lights dimmed until they were nearly black. The people around them stopped moving, but they didn't freeze naturally. Their bodies jerked, heads tilted at broken angles, jaws slack. Shadows pooled around their feet, rising up like smoke. "Do you feel it?" she asked. Her silver eyes seemed to glow now. "This place doesn't let you leave." Derek pulled his hand back, but something cold clamped around his ankle. He looked down and saw a pale hand, long fingers digging into his skin. It was reaching out from the shadow itself. The frozen dancers began to move again, but their faces had changed. Eyes black and hollow, mouths stretched impossibly wide. They reached for him, their fingertips brushing his arms, his neck, leaving trails of ice on his skin. He shoved through them, heading for the door, but the door wasn't there anymore. In its place was a long hallway lined with mirrors. In the mirrors, he saw himself. But each reflection was different. In one, he was dancing with the woman in red, eyes rolled back in his head. In another, he was lying on the floor, mouth open in a silent scream, as something dragged him into the shadows. The hallway stretched as he ran, the mirrors flashing more horrors, faces pressed against glass, mouths moving in frantic pleas, shadows slithering up their bodies like living tar. The woman's voice followed him. "The veil keeps what it takes." Something lunged from one of the mirrors, a shape without a face, just a mouth, all teeth. Its hands were too many, its limbs wrong. It grabbed his jacket, pulling him toward the glass. Derek tore free and ran. The hallway narrowed until he was scraping against both walls. The floor beneath him softened, sinking like wet sand. Cold water seeped up around his shoes, climbing quickly to his knees. Faces floated in it, their eyes open and unblinking, mouths silently screaming as they sank deeper. The water was at his chest now. He clawed forward, desperate for any sign of an exit. Ahead, he saw a faint purple glow. He burst through a doorway and found himself back in the alley, rain hitting his face like a slap. For a moment, relief flooded him, but then he noticed the ground. It was wet. Not from rain, but from the same black water he'd been sinking in. It pooled around his feet, spreading slowly. From somewhere deep in the alley, the music started again, slow, hypnotic. Derek turned to run but froze. The end of the alley was gone. In its place was the dance floor of Mr Dreadveil. The crowd swayed slowly, eyes half closed. In the center, the woman in red smiled at him, and in the faint reflection of a rain puddle at his feet, he saw himself already standing beside her. Derek's breath came in short, ragged bursts. Rainwater stung his face, but it didn't feel like rain anymore. It was too warm, almost sticky. His boots sloshed through the black puddles that hadn't been there moments ago, ripples spreading out in slow motion. From the far end of the alley, the music swelled again. The bass hit low in his chest, a slow heartbeat. A melody wound around it, twisting, climbing, until it sounded less like music and more like a chorus of voices, some whispering, some screaming. He stepped back, but his heel met resistance. The wall. Except, it wasn't brick anymore. He turned. The surface behind him was smooth, glossy, and cold. His own reflection stared back at him, but its movements were wrong. While he stood frozen in terror, the reflection smiled, lips peeling back over teeth that were too sharp, too many. A figure appeared beside his reflection. The woman in red. She slid her arm through his reflections, tilting her head toward him as though inviting him to step through the glass. Derek stumbled forward, away from the wall. The puddles stretched, connecting, until the entire ground was a sheet of black water. Beneath it, faint shapes moved, faces, hands, bodies, twisting slowly as if caught in invisible currents. Their eyes glowed faintly, white in the darkness. The music grew louder, closer, until it felt like it was vibrating inside his skull. From the water's surface, pale hands began to rise. Fingers slick with something that wasn't rain reached for him, clutching at his legs. They weren't pulling fast. They didn't need to. Every touch made his muscles weaken, his heartbeat slow. He tried to shake them off, stumbling toward the mouth of the alley. It wasn't there. Where the street should have been was the entrance to the Mr Dreadveil. The black door was open, and beyond it the dance floor glowed faintly under violet light. The crowd swayed slowly, and every head turned toward him in perfect unison. The woman in red stood in the center, her silver eyes locking on his. "You left before the song ended," she said. Her voice was in his ears, in his head, and under his skin all at once. Derek spun around, but the alley had closed behind him. The black wall loomed, mirrors shimmering across its surface. In every reflection, he saw himself already inside the club, dancing, drinking, whispering in strangers' ears with eyes that weren't his own. The water rose to his knees, the pale hands multiplying, gripping, holding. Something massive moved beneath the surface, a shadow that circled him, sending ripples lapping against his thighs. Then the world tilted. The water pulled him under. It wasn't like falling. It was like being swallowed. Cold closed around him, pressing against his chest until his lungs burned. Faces surrounded him in the dark, mouths opening in silent screams, eyes wide and pleading. Some of them reached for him, but their fingers passed through him like smoke. The woman's voice echoed from somewhere above. Breathe. He couldn't. His chest ached. Spots burst in his vision, and just when he thought his skull would split from the pressure, the water vanished. Derek collapsed onto the dance floor. The crowd was gone. The club was empty, but the music still played, softer now, like it was coming from inside the walls. The air smelled of roses and rot. Shadows clung to the edges of the room, thicker than they should have been. They moved slowly, sliding along the walls, up the pillars, across the ceiling. From the far corner, the hostess in the black gown stepped forward. Her smile was unchanged, frozen. "The veil likes you," she said. "Not everyone is chosen." Derek scrambled to his feet. "I don't want to be here." Her smile didn't waver. "You already are." The shadows behind her deepened, opening like a wound in the wall. From it, something stepped through. It was tall, its head brushing the ceiling. Its body was human-shaped but wrong, too thin in some places, too wide in others, its joints bending in ways that made Derek's stomach turn. Its face was a mask of smooth, pale skin with no eyes, no mouth, until it tilted its head. Then a split opened where its mouth should be, stretching ear to ear, lined with needle-like teeth. It moved toward him slowly, the sound of its steps muffled as though the floor was swallowing them. The hostess's voice drifted across the space. "The veil needs a new song." Derek backed away, but the dance floor stretched beneath him, each step making the room longer instead of shorter. The thing in the corner didn't hurry. It didn't need to. He glanced toward the door. It was there again, black and tall, but the closer he moved, the farther away it seemed. The shadows on the walls began to reach for him, curling into hands, into faces, whispering his name. When one of them brushed his cheek, it was like touching ice and fire at the same time. Images slammed into his mind, moments of other lives, strangers' deaths, and something darker, endless, pulling all of them into the same void. He fell to his knees, hands over his ears, but the whispers were inside his head now. The woman in red appeared in front of him. She crouched down, silver eyes boring into his. "All you have to do is dance. One song, that's all." The thing with the needle teeth was right behind her now, its head tilting in sharp, unnatural jerks. Derek looked toward the mirrors on the far wall. In them, he saw himself take her hand. He saw himself smile. And then he saw something worse. He saw the crowd again, full and swaying, but every single dancer had his face. He screamed. The woman took his hand. Her grip was freezing. The music roared. The shadows surged forward, swallowing him whole. When the lights dimmed, the club was full again. The music pulsed slow and heavy, and a new man in the crowd swayed to the rhythm, eyes silver, smiling just a little too wide. Somewhere outside, in the rain-slick streets, a small purple sign swung gently. Midnight Veil. And if you stood close enough, you could hear the music, soft, inviting, and threaded through with the faintest sound of someone screaming far, far away. It was supposed to be just another Friday night. Ethan had no plans except to grab a drink, maybe dance a little, and shake off the week's exhaustion. When his friend Marco told him about a new underground nightclub in the heart of the city called Crimson Pulse, he hesitated at first. Marco swore it had no online presence, no ads, just word of mouth. Exclusive, hidden, dangerous. The entrance was down a narrow alley Ethan had never noticed before, its cobblestones slick with rain, lit only by a faint red glow. The bass was already pulsing from somewhere deep underground, like a giant mechanical heartbeat. The smell of wet concrete mixed with something sweet and metallic. A woman stood at the door, dressed in a black satin gown, her hair a shimmering cascade of ink. She didn't check IDs. She didn't speak. She simply opened the door when Ethan stepped forward, her gaze locking with his. Her eyes were an unnatural shade of pale silver, and for a moment he felt as if she was looking through him rather than at him. The stairs descended forever. Red light bled down the steps. The deeper he went, the louder the bass became, until his own pulse began to sync with it. The club exploded into view at the bottom, walls lined with mirrors, velvet drapes that swayed though there was no wind, and a dance floor crowded with bodies moving in perfect rhythm. Not just similar rhythm, perfect rhythm. No one stumbled, no one broke the flow. They swayed as one organism. Marco was nowhere to be seen. The air was warm and heavy, almost humid. A scent lingered, rose petals and copper. Every time the bass hit, the chandeliers overhead flickered, casting shadows that didn't seem to match the people who made them. Ethan ordered a drink from the bar. The bartender, a tall man with sharp cheekbones and pale skin, smiled too long before serving him a dark red cocktail. It tasted nothing like alcohol, more like pomegranate, but thicker, richer, leaving a strange warmth down his throat. That was when he saw her. In the center of the dance floor, a woman in a crimson dress moved unlike anyone else. Her hair spilled like molten gold down her back, and her silver eyes, identical to the doorkeeper's, never left his face. The crowd parted for her without breaking rhythm. She didn't walk toward him. She drifted, her feet barely touching the ground as if the music itself carried her forward. When she reached him, she extended a hand. Dance. Her voice was soft, but it carried above the music, wrapping around his mind like silk. Without thinking, he took her hand. The moment their skin touched, the room shifted. The mirrors lining the walls no longer reflected the club. They showed something else, dark corridors stretching into infinity, shadows twitching at the edges, faces pressed against the glass from the other side, faces that looked desperate. The dancers swayed around them, but Ethan realized something horrifying. Their eyes were closed, all of them, yet their heads moved in perfect time with the beat, and their mouths, every single one, was whispering, not singing, whispering. The whispers crawled into his ears, a language he didn't know yet somehow understood. One of us, one of us, one of us. The woman in crimson spun him around. He caught his reflection in a nearby mirror and froze. His reflection was smiling, even though his own face wasn't. The reflection leaned closer to the glass, mouthing words he couldn't hear. The music changed. The bass deepened into something that sounded less like drums and more like a heart slowing down. The lights dimmed to almost nothing. The crowd stopped dancing. Every head turned toward Ethan. Every pair of eyes opened, silver, glinting in the dark. The woman in crimson's smile widened, revealing teeth that were too sharp. It's time. The floor beneath him rippled, softening like water. Hands, cold, skeletal hands, burst through the surface, wrapping around his ankles, his calves, pulling him down. The whispers grew louder, filling his skull until his vision blurred. He tried to scream, but the air was thick, choking him. The bartender's pale face appeared above him, watching with mild curiosity. The doorkeeper stood behind him, her expression unreadable. As the hands dragged him under, the last thing he saw was the dance floor closing over his head like black glass. He was in a different place now, a hallway stretching into forever. The walls pulsed faintly, wet and breathing. The sound of the club was gone, replaced by the slow, steady beat of a single, massive heart. The light came from nowhere, but it was red, saturating everything. Figures stood along the hallway, their faces pale and expressionless. Some had no eyes, some had no mouths. All of them reached for him as he stumbled past, their fingers grazing his skin, leaving icy burns. At the far end, a mirror waited. His reflection was no longer human. Its skin was ash white, its eyes solid silver. It beckoned him forward. When he reached the mirror, the woman in crimson was there again, inside the glass. Behind her, the club pulsed with life, the dancers moving in perfect rhythm. Marco was among them now, his eyes closed, his mouth whispering. She touched the glass, and it rippled like water. "Dance," she whispered. Ethan's hands moved on their own. His feet followed. The whispers filled him, drowning every thought. The mirror dissolved, and he stepped through. The music slammed back into his chest. The chandeliers blazed. The crowd swayed in perfect unison. Silver eyes closed. He was one of them now. Somewhere, far above, in the rain-slick alley, the black satin doorkeeper let in a new guest. And if you stood close enough to the club's entrance, beneath the faint red glow, you could hear the bass thudding like a heartbeat. And buried inside it, if you listened very, very carefully, was the sound of someone screaming. The night was thick with humidity and a distant thunderstorm that rattled the city's skyline. Outside, neon signs flickered in the rain-soaked streets, but inside the narrow alley where Lucas found himself, the only light came from a faded, almost forgotten sign hanging above a rusted door. The Abyss. Lucas had heard rumors about the place. A nightclub that wasn't on any map. A spot where the music never stopped and the party never truly ended. Those who visited rarely spoke of what happened inside, and if they did, their words came as broken whispers, full of terror and madness. Curiosity had pulled Lucas down that alley, past the garbage bins and cracked pavement. The door creaked open before he even touched it, inviting him into a world that felt both familiar and utterly alien. Inside, the club was cavernous, swallowing the sounds of the storm outside. Red and purple lights cast long, twisting shadows across the dance floor, where bodies moved in slow, hypnotic rhythm to a bass line that felt like a heartbeat. Deep, unrelenting, and hungry. The crowd was a sea of faces, but there was something off about them. Their eyes shone too brightly, their smiles too wide and frozen. They danced like marionettes, pulled by invisible strings, their movements too perfect to be natural. A slender woman with jet black hair and eyes like polished obsidian approached Lucas. Her voice was a melody laced with warning. "Welcome to the Abyss. Are you ready to lose yourself?" Lucas swallowed hard and nodded. She led him to the bar where the bartender, a gaunt man with hollow cheeks and a gaze that seemed to pierce through the veil of reality, placed a glass filled with crimson liquid before him. "Drink," the bartender said, voice gravelly like distant thunder. The liquid was sweet and bitter all at once, like memories he had never lived. It slid down his throat, warming and chilling him simultaneously. The music shifted then, slowing and deepening. The lights flickered, revealing the faces around him shifting, stretching into grotesque masks of agony and despair. The woman's hand found his, cold and firm. "Dance with me," she whispered. As they moved together, the walls seemed to breathe, the mirrors lining the club warping to show dark corridors and endless voids. Lucas's heartbeat pounded in his ears as the room twisted and he realized he was no longer dancing with the woman, but with the shadows themselves, endless, hungry, and eternal. The night stretched on, and somewhere in the depths of the abyss, Lucas's soul was lost. Another echo swallowed by the relentless pulse of the club. The moment Lucas stepped deeper into the abyss, the air grew heavier, thicker, as if the very atmosphere was soaked in despair. The bass no longer felt like music. It was a pulse, a living heartbeat that seemed to beat beneath the floorboards, beneath the city itself. The patrons moved with unsettling uniformity, their eyes glazed, fixed on nothing, yet somehow seeing everything. Lucas's gaze flicked toward the walls, where mirrors stretched endlessly, but their reflections weren't his own. Instead, twisted versions stared back, faces contorted in silent screams, or frozen in grotesque smiles. The woman with the obsidian eyes reappeared beside him. "They don't leave," she whispered, voice like a breeze through dry leaves. The music binds them. The pulse. It's not just sound. It's hunger. Lucas swallowed, the rising panic choking his throat. He tried to pull away, but her grip tightened, cold as ice seeping through his veins. Suddenly, the lights flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness. When they returned, the crowd had shifted. Now, everyone's heads were tilted upward, mouths agape, revealing rows of sharp, unnatural teeth. A growl rumbled through the speakers, and the music twisted into a discordant symphony of howls and whispers. Shadows stretched and crept across the walls like living creatures, reaching toward Lucas with long, clawed fingers. The floor beneath his feet rippled like liquid, swallowing his boots, pulling him downward. He gasped, struggling to keep his footing, but the abyss was hungry. From the depths below, ghostly faces emerged, eyes empty but pleading, mouths mouthing silent warnings he couldn't hear. Lucas's heart thundered as the woman leaned close, breath cold and sharp against his ear. "Join us," she breathed, "or be lost forever." His vision blurred, the mirrors cracked, splintering like ice. Hands shot out from the shards, grabbing at his arms, dragging him toward the darkness beyond the glass. With a scream caught in his throat, Lucas fell backward, crashing onto the cold, wet floor. The music faded, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed in like a suffocating fog. He looked up. The woman was gone. The club was empty, save for the reflection staring back at him from a shattered mirror fragment. But it wasn't his face, it was something else, something waiting. Lucas scrambled away from the shattered mirror, heart pounding like a drumbeat, drowning out all reason. The silence of the club was unnatural, suffocating, as if the very walls held their breath. He pressed his back against the cold surface of a nearby pillar, eyes darting across the vast emptiness. Then a soft, distorted melody trickled through the darkness, a lullaby twisted with sorrow and menace. The music was coming from somewhere deeper, somewhere darker. Drawn by an unseen force, Lucas rose shakily to his feet and moved toward the sound. The corridor beyond the main hall was narrow, the walls slick with a damp, cold sheen. Flickering lights cast sickly shadows that seemed to breathe, pulsing in time with the mournful melody. His footsteps echoed, but the echoes didn't sound like his own. They warped, stretched, sometimes answering with whispers. Ahead, a doorway loomed, arched and blackened, adorned with strange symbols that pulsed faintly red. From within seeped the scent of decay and something sweet, like rotting fruit and burned sugar. Lucas hesitated, then stepped through. The room inside was vast, an underground chamber lined with hundreds of mirrors, each reflecting a different moment, a different fear, a different death. Faces pressed against the glass from the other side, eyes wide with terror, mouths screaming silently. At the center stood the woman in obsidian eyes, her form shifting like smoke. Around her, figures danced, twisted, broken, lost souls trapped in eternal torment. She turned slowly toward Lucas, smile widening to reveal teeth sharp and gleaming. "You sought escape," she whispered, voice both cruel and tender. "But you found the pulse, and the pulse never lets go." Before he could react, hands erupted from the mirrors, cold and clawed, pulling him into the glass. The surface rippled like water as he screamed, the club's heartbeat drowning out his cries. He was falling into darkness deeper than night, where the music never stopped, and the shadows never rested. The fall never seemed to end. Lucas tumbled through endless darkness, the only sound the distant, distorted pulse of the club's unholy rhythm. His limbs felt heavy, his breath shallow, as if the very air was being sucked from his lungs. Suddenly, light fractured the void, a jagged shimmer of crimson and violet. He landed hard on a cold, glassy floor, surrounded by towering mirrors reflecting infinite versions of himself, each twisted and broken in unspeakable ways. The woman with obsidian eyes stood before him, her presence overwhelming, a darkness that pressed against his soul. "You dance now," she said softly, voice echoing like a nightmare lullaby. Around them, shadows coalesced into figures, faces of the lost, mouths moving in silent songs of sorrow and despair. They circled Lucas, drawing him into their unending waltz. His body moved without will, compelled by the pulse that had trapped so many before him. The music filled him, a dark symphony that drowned reason, hope, and fear. In the reflection of a broken mirror, Lucas saw his own eyes, silver and empty, mirroring the endless void. He was no longer himself. Outside, the rain ceased. The alley where the abyss stood fell silent once more, the sign's flickering light dimming to darkness. But somewhere, just beneath the surface, the heartbeat continued, waiting, calling, pulling in the next lost soul. The club never closes, the music never stops, and the pulse, it never forgets. The city was alive with the buzz of nightlife, neon signs flickering like distant stars against the dark sky. Deep within a forgotten alley, hidden from the casual passerby, stood the entrance to the last dance, a nightclub shrouded in whispers and shadows. No one knew exactly how long it had been there, and few ever spoke of it openly. But those who did warned of its allure, a siren's call wrapped in beats and strobe lights, promising escape, but delivering something far darker. Jake had heard the rumors all his life, the stories of people who went in but never came out, of a music that never stopped and dancers who moved like puppets. He never believed them. Until one rainy Friday night, when a mysterious invitation slipped through his door, sealed with a black wax emblem. The last dance awaited. He was young, reckless, and desperate for something to break the monotony of his life. So he followed the map on the back of the invitation, down a narrow alley slick with rain. The faint thump of bass echoed from behind a rusted metal door, pulsing like a heartbeat. The door creaked open before he could knock. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and sweat, electric with the thrum of music. The club was vast, an endless cavern of bodies moving in perfect rhythm, lights flashing in staccato bursts that cast strange, shifting shadows. Jake's eyes scanned the crowd. Faces were pale, eyes glazed or hidden behind dark glasses, smiles that never quite reached the eyes. There was something off, something wrong. The energy wasn't just from the music, it was something else, ancient and hungry. He moved deeper inside, the thumping bass syncing with his racing heart. At the bar, a woman in a blood-red dress slid a glass toward him without a word. Her eyes were cold and dark, locking onto his with an intensity that made his skin crawl. He drank. The liquid was sweet and spicy, burning down his throat, leaving a chill that sank into his bones. Suddenly the lights flickered and dimmed. The crowd froze, heads turning slowly toward Jake, their eyes now glowing faintly in the dim light. The woman stepped forward, her smile growing impossibly wide, revealing sharp teeth that glinted like knives. "The music never stops here," she whispered. "And neither do we." The floor beneath Jake's feet shifted like liquid, opening wide to reveal cold, grasping hands reaching up. Panic surged through him as he tried to pull away, but invisible forces held him fast. His last scream was swallowed by the pulsing beat as darkness claimed him. When Jake's eyes fluttered open, he found himself lying on cold, cracked concrete. The familiar throb of bass had faded, replaced by a heavy, unnatural silence. The air was thick, stale, carrying a faint scent of decay. Around him, the walls were covered in peeling, faded posters, advertisements for the club but torn and stained like relics from a distant past. He struggled to sit up, every muscle protesting as a dull ache spread through his body. His head throbbed, and the taste of that burning drink lingered bitterly on his tongue. But the worst part was the silence. The music, the crowd, the lights, all gone. A creeping dread began to coil in his gut as he surveyed the dim room. There was a heavy iron door slightly ajar leading into a narrow corridor shrouded in shadow. A flickering light at the far end offered a faint glimmer of hope, or perhaps a trap. Jake's instincts screamed at him to run, but curiosity and fear rooted him to the spot. Slowly he rose, feeling his way toward the corridor, each step echoing like a death knell. As he moved forward, whispers brushed against his ears, soft, unintelligible, yet laden with desperation. The walls themselves seemed to pulse, the shadows writhing like living things. Suddenly a figure emerged from the darkness, a man gaunt and pale, dressed in tattered clothing that seemed decades out of time. His eyes were sunken hollows and his mouth twisted into a grim smile. "You're awake," the man said, voice hollow but urgent. "Few survive the dance. Fewer still escape." Jake swallowed hard. "Where am I? What is this place?" The man gestured behind him. "This is the club's heart, a place where the music never dies and souls are trapped in eternal rhythm." Jake's gaze followed the man's hand to a large, cracked mirror mounted on the wall. Reflected within was not his own image, but a swirling vortex of shadows and flickering faces, each screaming silently in torment. "They call it the pulse," the man continued. "A beat that binds. Once you hear it, you're never truly free." Jake's breath hitched as the distant throb of bass echoed faintly, growing louder, pulling at something deep inside him. "I have to get out," Jake said, panic rising. The man's smile faded. "There is no way out, only deeper in." Before Jake could react, the corridor behind him shifted, the walls closing in, narrowing like a living mouth. The floor vibrated as the music surged through the club's unseen veins. Cold fingers reached from the shadows, grabbing at Jake's arms, dragging him toward the mirror. He fought, heart-hammering, but the pulse was relentless. Suddenly, the cracked glass shattered, and Jake was pulled through, tumbling into darkness. He landed hard on a cold floor, this time surrounded by figures. Dancers frozen mid-motion, faces twisted in agony and ecstasy alike. Among them was the woman in crimson, her eyes blazing, teeth sharp as daggers. "You dance for eternity now," she said, voice a haunting lullaby. The music roared back to life, enveloping Jake as his limbs moved of their own accord. The dance had begun again, an endless, torturous waltz with no end. The music surged louder than ever, a relentless storm crashing inside Jake's chest. His feet moved without his will, guided by the invisible rhythm that bound him tighter with every step. Around him, the club warped, walls bending and twisting, faces melting into shadows that whispered secrets of torment and despair. He tried to scream, tried to fight, but his voice was lost amid the deafening beat. His limbs felt heavy chains, dragging him deeper into a nightmare he couldn't wake from. The woman in crimson appeared at his side, her eyes gleaming with cruel delight. "You belong here now," she murmured, voice like silk soaked in poison. "Forever part of the pulse." Jake's mind fractured as memories flashed. Faces of the lost, screams unheard, dances eternal. He saw himself reflected in shattered mirrors, eyes vacant, trapped. The realization crashed down. He was no longer alive. Around him, the other dancers closed in, their forms blurring into ghostly apparitions, whispering his name, dragging him into their endless waltz. The music swallowed him whole, the last flicker of his will extinguished in the abyss. Outside, the rain ceased. The alley where the last dance stood grew silent, the neon sign flickering and dying. But deep within, the pulse still beat, waiting, calling the next soul to dance forever.